For joining this webinar on the 2016 legislative session. My name is Paul Winkler. I'm one of the lobbyists here at Education Minnesota. We also have here our two other lobbyists, Kathy Micheletti.
Good morning.
And Jody Boer.
Good morning, everyone.
The three of us will be going through the webinar. Feel free to ask any questions. We'll answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. Some housekeeping that if we could go through. Can everyone hear me? We asked that. Could you please mute yourselves till the end for the questions? We're hearing a lot of feedback here on our end. And we are also tracking the questions in the text box, and we will answer all those questions at the end. So let us start.
All right, so this past session is considered the short session at the Capitol. It didn't start until March 8th and ended on May 23rd, which is a very short time frame to get things done. Last year, the legislature set the budget for the state. There was a $900 million surplus for this session, and it was believed that along with bonding, there would be work done on transportation, education, and taxes. In addition to the short time frame we were working with and the divided government, all 201 House and Senate members are up for re-election in 2016. And obviously those election politics impacted almost everything that happened at the Capitol this year. All these factors led to very little changes happening in education overall this session.
Okay, so as Jody mentioned, the state posted a $900 million budget surplus. A portion of this money was from last year that wasn't spent. So when we started this legislative session, we were very optimistic that legislators would be interested in making additional investments, specifically around education. The governor, Senate, and House then each introduced their own plan to spend that $900 million. The governor wanted to spend $125 million on education, the Senate $100 million, and the House only $53 million. However, when the session ended on May 23rd, the final budget deal ended up spending $182 million, of which $80 million was spent on K-12 education and $5 million on higher education. We'll get into specifics of the education spending later. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what Education Minnesota's legislative priorities were and how they ended up. One of our top priorities this year was to fully fund TDE and QComp. As you know, in 2011, the legislature passed the Teacher Development and Evaluation Law, but didn't provide funding to implement it. About half of our students and teachers are in QComp districts, and those schools can use their QComp dollars for TD&E. If you don't have QComp in your district, you have to implement TD&E without any funding. Both the governor and the Senate included a $10 million one-time appropriation for TD&E in their budgets. The Senate even went a step further and included additional funding for QComp, as well as completely lifting the cap off of the QComp program. However, when the final bill came out, there was no funding for TD&E or QComp.
Another of our priorities, and a big priority for the legislature this year, was teacher recruitment and retention. Both political parties know that this is a problem, and both the House, Senate, and Governor Dayton proposed spending money to address the teacher shortage. They funded grants for Grow Your Own program so paraprofessionals can become teachers. They also funded a student teacher grants for those students going into a teacher shortage area. And lastly, they put $2 million into a loan forgiveness program. You may have seen the emails from Education Minnesota on the loan forgiveness programs. Teachers had until the end of June to apply for this grant.
All right, another one of Education Minnesota's priorities was around pre-kindergarten. We supported the governor's proposal last session to fund universal access to pre-K for all 4-year-olds. And a top priority for this was that the proposal include a requirement for licensed teachers. The proposal was not included last session, and in light of the political landscape, the governor put forward a scaled-back version this session. The final proposal that passed included $25 million for a pre-K program. but unfortunately it didn't include the important quality measure of requiring licensed teachers. Districts were required to apply for the voluntary pre-K funding. The application process was open from June 3rd to July 1st, and 184 applications were completed. School districts and charter schools will be notified of their funding status by August 1st. If you are interested in knowing if your district applied and/or will receive funding, you can go to the Minnesota Department of Education website and search on voluntary pre-kindergarten, or you can obviously contact us as well. Another one of our top priorities was a change in the law so our early childhood family educators and adult basic educator positions would be covered under the Continuing Contract Law and Teacher Tenure Act. This would ensure our ECFE and ABE teachers would be on the same playing field as their K-12 peers and receive the same protections. Unfortunately, in a last-minute, behind closed doors, purely political move, the Republicans would not accept this language and in fact threatened to put the entire omnibus bill at risk if it was included. We will continue to work on this next session. Also, last session, we were successful in passing policy language to implement full-service community schools. This is a strategy that puts social, medical, and supplemental academic services where they are most successful on the school campus. In addition to the policy language, we also received $500,000 in funding, which was a start but not enough to cover the demand. This year, we were again successful in securing more funding, $1 million. We know there are many schools that want to implement the full-service community strategy, and we will continue to work on additional funding needed to implement this proven strategy. The application process for this funding opened July 21st and closes August 31st. If you are interested in learning more about this and or finding out if your district is applying, please contact us.
One of the things we hear most often from members is that there's too much testing. This year, Representative Frank Hornstein and Senator Susan Kent worked with us in authorizing the Transparency in Testing Act. There are many components of the initial bill, but what came out of that bill in the end was pretty good. Districts will be able to establish assessment teams in which teachers, parents, and administrators can work together to select locally optioned tests. Districts will also have to post their assessment calendars so parents and teachers can see just how many tests each district will give. The Minnesota Department of Education will also post an opt-out form that parents can download if they would like to opt their child out of the MCAs. We also work to get the Office of Legislative Auditor to audit school districts in the state to see just how much money our school districts and state are spending on standardized tests. We hope that the auditor will investigate not only just the financial costs of all these tests, but also the lost learning time for students. While we had some success with testing legislation, unfortunately, legislators added a required civics test, which passed this session. We also worked with the coalition to get more school counselors, psychologists, social workers, nurses, and chemical dependency counselors into our schools. As you know, Minnesota ranks 49th out of 50 in counselor to student ratio. This is a grant of one-time money to help school districts add additional student support positions. It isn't a long-term fix, but it starts us on the path of giving our students the support they need. The Minnesota Department of Education is currently accepting applications for these grants, and we hope you can talk to your administrators about applying.
Okay, so that was a summary of our proactive legislative proposals, but what else happened this session? There has been a lot of talk in the media lately about student discipline and teacher safety. Several bills on these topics were introduced this session, ranging from automatic expulsion to administrative protocols on how to handle incidents. Several provisions ultimately passed, including language that allows a teacher to remove a student from class, also requires districts to report data on student assaults to MDE, and ensures that teachers are notified if a student with prior assaults is placed in their classrooms. As we know, these are complex and multi-layered problems. Because of this, the legislature also created a task force to look more closely into these issues. We have 2 members serving on this group, and will be closely monitoring their work over the interim and expect their recommendations to turn into legislation next session. And because the legislature likes working groups so much, they also set up another one on teacher licensure. This is another issue that has received a lot of attention over the past 2 years, mostly due to the frustration that some legislators and groups feel over what they see as an overly complicated and inefficient system to license teachers here in Minnesota. The Office of Legislative Auditor was directed to do an audit of the licensure process and came out with a series of recommendations, most of which we support, to try and streamline this process and consolidate all licensure activities into one organization. Again, this group will have a series of recommendations that will be presented to the legislature next year as well. Okay, and good news and bad news regarding special education. A provision in the final bill directed MDE to look at ways to reduce special ed paperwork by 25%. That's the good news. However, they also took back over $1 million from MDE that was earmarked for creating an online system for special ed that would have ultimately reduced that same paperwork.
Of course, we had to play a bit of defense at the Capitol this year and work to make sure some things didn't happen. Last year, as you know, House Republicans targeted unrequested leave of absences by writing a bill that would have pitted teacher against teacher and ranked each teacher when it comes to layoffs. They did not do that this year, but again did go after the seniority statute by including provisions in their bill that would have mandated that the ULA process be bargained and remove the fallback for districts and locals to use seniority.
And the House Republicans also included in their final bill several provisions that would have basically wiped out our health insurance bill, HIDA, that we passed 2 years ago. However, the Senate did not include these provisions and made sure that they were not included in any final bill. We know healthcare continues to be a major issue for our members and know that we will be back working on this again next year.
NEO vouchers. One of the new ways that corporate ed reformers aim to privatize schools is through tax credits. Republicans this year aim to make any tuition a person may pay to go to private schools eligible for a tax credit, basically reimbursing their money. While there were income limits to this language, it essentially is a new way to fund vouchers.
And on pensions, so the results of the most current experience study of the Teachers Retirement Association Fund revealed some good news, that our teachers, both active and retired, are expected to live much longer than previously predicted. While this is good news, it means that benefits are going to be paid in the future for a longer time, and that adjustments need to be made to ensure the fund remains financially healthy. The study also revealed that investment returns are expected to be lower in the future, and consequently, the actuary recommended lowering the interest assumption from 8.5% to 8%. The Teachers Retirement Association Board approved a legislative proposal that we supported, which was a shared sacrifice approach, which would include an increase in the employer contribution of 1%, from 7.5% to 8.5%, reducing the COLA by 1% from 2% for 5 years into 1.75 thereafter. Unfortunately, the bill that passed at the end of session only included the COLA change, and the governor vetoed the bill. Ensuring the sustainability of the pension fund will be a priority going into next session.
As many of you know, Governor Dayton did not sign the tax bill that was passed by the legislature due to the discovery of a $100 million error. We had tax bills heard this year in the House and the Senate, and we aim to get a tax credit for student loan debt payments, a tax credit for tuition, and a tax credit for costs paid by teachers for school supplies. In the final bill, we did get a tax credit for student loan debt payments. It was a very popular aspect of the bill by all parties, but the discovery of the $100 million error, the governor didn't sign the bill, so it didn't come into law. We will continue to look at all options to help our members with their often insane student loan debt.
So, for the second year in a row, the legislature was unable to come to agreement on a transportation, bonding, or tax bill. This means that absent a special session, These issues will be at the forefront when the legislature reconvenes next year. There has been much more chatter recently about a special session, potentially at the end of August, so let's all stay tuned for that. Switching gears to the federal level, the No Child Left Behind Act has finally been replaced by ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act. We're very excited about this and hope it will bring some positive changes and more teacher voice into the decision-making process. All of the regulations have not yet been finalized, but we do know a few things. We're still stuck with the MCAs in grades 3 through 8 and once in high school. However, there will be future opportunities to reduce testing and also to change the high school MCAs to the ACT or SAT. And some good news, the emphasis on test scores and tying their results to teacher performance and school ratings will be going away. There are also multiple grant opportunities available under ESSA. Two that we will be looking at more closely include full-service community schools and early learning programs, which, as you know, are two of our top legislative priorities. Right now, the Minnesota Department of Education is working on our state plan, which is due in March. As part of developing that plan, they will be forming work groups on specific topics. We expect to be part of those, and we'll be reaching out to members to serve on these committees. If you're interested in serving on something, please let us know. Also, MDE will be hosting regional meetings to discuss the outline of their plan. We will also be publicizing meetings and hope you will attend if interested. As you can imagine, this is an incredibly complex and large piece of legislation. In addition to the MDE meetings, Education Minnesota is planning to have several trainings and workshops available for members to learn more about ESSA in the coming months.
We had a record year this session with member turnout. So for those of you who attended a lobby day, testified, met with your legislator back home, called or emailed the legislator, we thank you very much. Your stories and experiences impact legislators the most. We've heard legislators time and again repeat stories that they've heard from you, their educators in their districts. Also, you may have seen that our policy department has produced a series of EPIC reports on various topics, testing, pre-K, full-service community schools, etc. These papers are written by a group of members, and we've had over a dozen of these members lead and participate in the news conferences when the reports are released.
As Jody said, having you talk with legislators is our most powerful lobbying tool, so we continue to need your help over the next months in meeting and talking with your legislators. We are always happy to set up and attend these meetings if your group would like us to. We also have a good opportunity with the upcoming elections for members to participate in election activities. This is a great way to get to know your local legislators outside of the Capitol by doing something that they are very appreciative of. We also work with legislators and candidates all across the state and would be happy to help you coordinate this as well.
We have wrapped up the webinar here. We can't thank you enough for attending and listening.